I'm Citizen Spokesman Eylon Levy. This is the daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office. We are live on YouTube, Instagram and Twitter. Please begin submitting questions in the chat. Search for the Israeli...
Eylon Levy might have been the most famous English-speaking spokesman for the Israeli government's public relations effort after October 7th. And for 6 months, he gave daily press briefings from the Prime Minister's office and also appeared on countless English-language TV programs as an international media spokesman. Even his dark eyebrows became famous after a particularly hostile British interviewer on Sky News asked Levy whether Israel valued Palestinian prisoners' lives less than they valued Israeli hostages' lives. His astonished facial expression and subsequent calm reply sparked his meteoric rise to celebrity. But after running afoul of Sarah Netanyahu, who didn't like that before the war, Levy had been a frequent participant in the massive street protests against her husband's judicial reforms, Levy found himself suspended in March. It also might have had something to do with his snarky social media spat with British Foreign Secretary Lord David Cameron, who was alleging international aid wasn't being allowed to go into Gaza, which Levy said was untrue. After a very brief period of unemployment, Levy pivoted and he started to build his own public relations outfit to tell Israel's story. He's confident he can do it way better than Israel's official channels have managed to do because, he says, aside from the battlefield, Israel has been losing the PR war that Iran and Hamas and the Palestinians have been fighting and winning, with devastating results that he says have driven a wedge between Israel and the world, and here in Canada, between Jews and our neighbours.
That's the nature of the campaign, to accuse Israel of genocide and being a white settler, colonial, fascist, apartheid, blah, 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 every nasty word in the dictionary. It's to convince your neighbours, good, ordinary, decent, peace-loving people, that Israel has no right to exist, and that therefore when someone attacks it, you know what? The Jews had it coming.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, July the 15th, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News. Eylon Levy's new outfit is called the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office, and he's still doing all the same things he was doing with the official title, but now as a civilian. He does a daily briefing, there's a podcast, and many social media posts, and he showcases a team of high-profile English-speaking Israelis on the roster, including former politician Einat Wolf and Michal Kotler-Wunsch, Israel's current anti-Semitism envoy, and Hamilton-born Ashley Waxman-Bakshi, a former beauty blogger who's now repping Israel on social media. And the English-language media outlets keep calling. They know they'll get Levy's trademark snappy sound bites and calm presence to talk facts about what Israel is doing in the war. He banks on that name recognition and his championship debating skills picked up while studying at Oxford and growing up in England to Israeli expat parents. When he made Aliyah, he cut his teeth in the PR field, first as a spokesman for the Israeli army. Then he went into journalism and was a TV news anchor. Eventually, he worked as spokesman for the president, Isaac Herzog. Until now, he'd never been to Canada, but since the spring, he's come twice in a few weeks. The first time, UJA Federation of Greater Toronto paid to have him as the keynote speaker to a top gifts dinner. 10 days ago, he came back, this time on his own dime, to fundraise for his new venture. He did a flurry of media interviews with friendly journalists, he met Jewish leaders, and he picked up a tidy donation from philanthropist Miles Nadal. Here's my conversation with Eylon Levy about why the media war matters.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, you're here on a whirlwind. You've called it an emergency visit to Canada, which I find quite interesting. But before we get into why, could you tell our listeners what was the reason why you decided to come again now?
You know, I'd never been to Canada before, and now I'm visiting twice in the space of a little more than a month. Toronto made a great impression on me. So here I'm back for two reasons. First of all, to continue fighting the media war here in Canada. We're recording this interview between joining Ben Mulroney on Breakfast Radio this morning and an interview with the National Post later. There is a global campaign right now to try to drive a wedge between Israel and its allies in the free world, between Canadian Jewry and your neighbours. It's a concern for Israel, for the whole Jewish world, and I'm here to fight against that and make the case for Israel. But also I'm here to fundraise. I'm here to fundraise for the Citizen Spokesperson's Office, the new outfit that I established after I finished my role as a government spokesperson, out of a realization that we simply don't have time or the luxury of things getting worse until they get better. The information war is critical for the future of Israel, for the future of Jewish communities, for the future of the free world, no less. And that requires funds. So we're here for meetings with representatives of Canada's very generous and committed Jewish community to help us build a machine that will empower the diaspora to continue fighting for Israel and the Jewish people, making information accessible in sound bites and arguments and information they need to fight.
So you said that there's an organized campaign to drive a wedge between Israel and its allies like Canada and Canadian Jews. How do you know this, and what does this look like, and who's behind it?
Well, just look. Just look at what we're seeing around the world. Just look at the lies and propaganda that Hamas is putting out. Just look at the allegations, the ridiculous allegations of genocide, of starvation, of famine, of allegations that Israel is deliberately targeting civilians. There is an attempt here to blacken Israel's name in the international media, to turn Israel into evil incarnate. And the reason they're doing that is because Iran and the Palestinians are perfectly clear. They want to destroy Israel. And it will make it a hell of a lot easier to destroy Israel if they can convince good, ordinary Canadians and Americans and Brits and French people that Israel deserves to be destroyed. That's what's at stake now, and that's why it's so important for all of us to make our voices heard and to stand up to the bullying and intimidation. Otherwise, things are going to get worse, and I certainly don't want to live in a world in which those lies go unchallenged.
So you're saying this is Iran-backed money, this is Qatar money, this is what kind of money, where is this coming from? Bots from Russia? Who's responsible for this?
All of the above. I'm not an investigative journalist, and I have spoken to people who are trying to follow the money trail and work out how exactly these NGOs have been coordinating. But whether the money is coming from Iran or Qatar or other donors, I think is less important than the consequences of what is truly at stake. You have a situation now, I saw a recent poll that half of Canadians think that Israel is committing genocide. That's horrific.
Do you remember what poll that was?
I can't remember off the top of my head. A world in which those lies go unchallenged is not a world that will be safe for the Jewish diaspora. What we've realized since October 7th is just how much Israel and the diaspora are in the same boat together. And we don't have the luxury of ignoring what is happening on each other's end of the pond. Israelis do not have the luxury of saying, well, people on Canadian universities can say whatever they want. It doesn't affect us. And Canadian Jews don't have the luxury of saying, well, there can be a war in the Middle East. It has nothing to do with us. It bites both of us. And fighting, therefore, against the lies and for Israel's right to defend its people is fighting for the safety and security and prosperity of Canadian Jews, not to be tarred by association with the false accusations being made against Israel. And for Israel standing up for the diaspora and against the intimidation and harassment that you are experiencing here is to fight for a world in which Western countries stick to their own values of freedom and liberalism and democracy. And there is no way that the diaspora sinks while Israel swims, or Israel swims while the diaspora sinks. We're in this together. And we need you. We need you to stay and fight. We need you to stay and fight for your countries, for sanity. We need the diaspora to make the world safe for Israel so that Israel can make the world safe for the Jews. It's a symbiotic relationship, and everything we've been through since October 7th only reinforces that.
So when you said earlier that there's a role you see the diaspora Jewish community of Canada playing in your citizen spokesperson work.
Two things. First of all, we are looking for donors for the citizen spokesperson's office, but the purpose of the spokesperson's office is to empower supporters around the world who want to speak for Israel but feel they don't have the information or the words or the confidence, who will listen to someone talking nonsense about Israel on the radio or a local politician also talking dirt about Israel and feel they don't have the tools to fight back. Here's what we're doing. We've built a studio and we are broadcasting every day on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the social media platforms, a daily briefing. Every day with a carefully crafted briefing that will give you not a news roundup, but a core message that you need to know in order to continue fighting the allegations against Israel and fighting Israel's corner. We're trying to make it as accessible as possible. We adapt the material into a 1-minute reel for Instagram. We're working on getting it out as a Substack. You can even listen to it as a podcast afterwards if you weren't able to watch it live. We want to empower the diaspora, because what I realized during my time as a government spokesman, and I knew this before as an Ole myself, as a previous diaspora Jew, I made Aliyah from London, is that the diaspora is an incredible force multiplier. And the same outburst of generosity and civic responsibility we saw in Israel on October 7th, when people dropped everything and said, what can I do to help? We saw that in the diaspora too. People want to help, they're organizing to help because they understand what is at stake here. But sometimes they feel they don't have the words. So the purpose of the Citizen Spokesperson's Office is we want to give people the words, not to click share on a story and share it with another 300 Jewish friends, but to have the arguments that they need to go out and speak to their non-Jewish friends, to reach out beyond the echo chamber, to use the fact that Canadian Jewry is not a ghetto, it is not isolated, it is plugged in very closely into Canadian life in all walks of life, to be able to continue making the case for Israel, an important, essential Canadian ally, and for the Canadian Jewish community as well.
You said for important Canadian Israeli ally, we need to talk about that. The Canadian government has not sent, the Prime Minister has not come to Israel since October 7th, and that they've moved against Israel with the arms embargo. You know this. You know that they're funding UNRWA again after stopping for 5 minutes. How does Israel view Canada now?
It's complicated because the Trudeau government has been, as they say in Hebrew, trying to dance at both weddings, to have its cake and eat it, to tread a fine line, and I don't think being particularly successful. Canada's behaviour, or rather the Trudeau government's behaviour, is no way to treat an ally. It has been deeply disappointing, but it doesn't change the fact that Israel is an ally of Canada, perhaps an ally not treated fairly, but an ally nonetheless. And you need only look at the joint statement made by world leaders at the G7 summit in Italy just a few weeks ago, in which Canada's government, Prime Minister Trudeau, signed on to a statement expressing full solidarity and support with Israel and reaffirming their unwavering commitment to its security. Not just that, but also condemning Hamas for waging war out of civilian infrastructure. Now, if the Canadian government doesn't fully understand the threat posed by barbaric terrorists, then that's a problem for Canada's government, and it's a perception that we are trying to change. And I think that the government has treated Israel appallingly. I think it lost its nerve. Canada's response has been deeply disappointing, but it doesn't change the fact that Israel and Canada are, in the grand scheme of things, essential allies in the Western world order against the same forces that seek to disrupt our way of life and export terrorism around the world. And when people chant "globalize the Intifada" on Canadian university campuses, and we warn the West is next, we agree. We're saying the same thing, but they mean it as a threat, and we mean it as a warning.
Israel's had, and Israel, the Jewish Agency, they've had Hasbara groups, Stand With Israel, Camera, Canary, so many different Hillels for years all across the country in various places. There's COGAT, there's the Foreign Ministry where you used to work, the Public Diplomacy. There's so many pro-Israel groups that have been doing the speaking for months and years. And you're saying it's time to replace it with yours, because why? What's wrong with what all these are doing? And how will yours do better?
We're not talking about replacing anything. We're talking about supplementing. We're talking about bringing in the big guns, so to speak, to support this information war and empower and help others work together and work more effectively. One of the things I discovered when I was a government spokesman, I would give a press conference every day, is that not only journalists were tuning in, People around the diaspora would tune in on YouTube to the press conferences I was giving because they saw it as an effective, authoritative source of information, carefully crafted, and gave them the information, the sound bites, and the confidence they needed to go out and fight our corner. We no longer speak for the government, but we very much want to remain that central address that people can tune in and say, we trust and we respect this voice, and that we can help to set the agenda. We do not at all want to replace any of the efforts that are being made to fight. We are far too small as a people to try to replace anything or come at the expense of anyone. What we are saying is, after 6 months of a baptism by fire, as a government spokesman in the course of a frenetic and hectic war, we are bringing that expertise, we are bringing the connections that we have within the Israeli establishment, our proximity to the spokespeople and decision makers in other parts of the Israeli state. And we're processing that in a way that will make information and arguments accessible to the diaspora in a way that will help them fight and, more importantly, go on the offensive, not only be on the defensive. We want to provide arguments and information. We hope that other organizations will take that baton and run with it. We don't want to replace, we're here to supplement. And that if we merge our forces together, we will become exponentially stronger and exponentially more influential.
You've recently said focus on non-Jewish allies. This is where you also have to remember that they have influence. So I'm sure you spoke to Ben Mulrooney today and you're speaking to the National Post. What can non-Jewish allies and journalists and influencers do, and what role do you see them play?
It starts with taking their head out of the sand. I get the impression that there is a deep sense of denial about the domestic extremism problem reflected in the, what you call encampments, I call the campus tentifada, reflected in the protests, that freedom of speech is sacrosanct, but calling for, glorifying and encouraging terrorism is absolutely not. And that this isn't a question about some conflict far away on the other side of the ocean. It's about what kind of country Canada wants to be. Does it want to be a safe, inclusive space for its mosaic of diverse groups, or a place where Jews are increasingly feeling threatened, intimidated? I don't think that is the kind of country that Canada wants to be. I think Canada wants to be the kind of country in which a pride parade can be celebrated, not where a pride parade gets shut down by protesters on the side of a homophobic terror regime, and they get to call themselves the progressive when the only things they're pro is pro-terror.
It's dangerous. People who are members of parliament here who are not Jewish get spit on.
It is dangerous. It is dangerous. It is scary. And I'll tell you the one thing I know, if it isn't challenged now, it will become more dangerous and it will become scarier. And the question for these non-Jewish allies is not really about Israel at all. It's about whether they want to live in a country in which the mob gets to decide. And Canada's a country governed by mob rule, where you can be cancelled for expressing the wrong opinion, when the wrong opinion is to stand up for a fellow democracy fighting for its life against Iran and a proxy of coalition armies on 7 fronts. Do you want these people to control public discourse and shut down free speech in the name of enemies of the West? Or are you going to stand up for Western values? And then it has nothing to do with us. And you discover that the argument taking place about Israel is a way in which people are projecting other issues, other culture wars, not really about Israel itself. And that if you say, okay, let the pro-Hamas mob win, we'll cancel everything Israeli, we'll cancel everything Jewish, what kind of country do you think you're going to be left with? It's not going to be a liberal democracy.
Well, there is a regime of nationalist politics sweeping Europe and sweeping North America, of course, and the Israeli government has serious right-wing elements as well. On that point, my final question would be, how do you then cope with people in the Israeli government who make things terrible for Jews when they say there's no such thing as a Palestinian people, or they want to have from the river to the sea and only for Jews? I'm talking about Smotrich and all the people who we hear about on this side, which make us pull our hair out because it makes it...
I'll put it bluntly, sometimes they need to shut up. They need to understand the immense strategic damage that they are doing to Israel by making it difficult for allies to stand up for us. Their first responsibility is, of course, the safety and security of Israel. But as part of that, it's also about drawing the diaspora in and not pushing them away with extremist statements. And there is immense responsibility on all of them to understand how their words are understood both in context and out of context, and consider the effect that they have on the information war that we are fighting in order to support Israel's efforts to bring down Hamas, bring back the hostages. And now we haven't really touched on this in the interview, but push Hezbollah away from the northern border before this spirals into a truly cataclysmic war.
All right, we could have talked for longer, but I know you only have half an hour, so I really appreciate getting to speak with you at the CJN Daily. Thanks for being with us, and good luck.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily. To find out more about the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office, you can go to the links in our show notes. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. As always, thanks for listening to the CJN Daily.
Y'all remember that joke from Airplane? The old lady asked for some light reading.
How about this leaflet, famous Jewish sports legends?
But in actuality, that's changing. Jews are crushing it in sports around the world, and we are here to celebrate them.
Sandy Koufax gets his 10th strikeout.
Zach Hyman, his first career hat trick. 41 points for Diddy Avdia. It's Sue Bird's building.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Jamie.
We love Jews and we love sports, but most of all, we love kvelling over Jews in sports.
Together we host Menschwarmers, the longest-running Jewish sports podcast in the world. Listen and subscribe at thecjn.ca and wherever you find your podcasts.